Eric is paid $12.50 per hour for the first 40 hours of a regular work week. Overtime is paid at time and a half. Last week, he worked 48 hours. Calculate his earnings for the regular 40 hours work. And so the question asks us to calculate Eric's earnings for the regular 40 hours of work. So in order to do this, we're going to take $12.50, which is his hourly rate, how much he is paid per hour, and multiply it by 40, because that's the amount of hours that we're looking at, 40 hours. And so it's going to be $12.50 multiplied by 40. And when we multiply those two together, we get $500. And so that means that his earnings for a regular 40 hours worked is going to be $500. Next, the question says, calculate his earnings for 1 hour overtime. Notice that overtime is paid at time and a half. And since they said time and a half, we're going to use 1.5. Now, if they said double time, then we're going to multiply our hourly rate by 2. But because they said time and a half, we're going to use 1.5. And so it's going to be 1.5 multiplied by 1250, which is the hourly rate. And so 1.5 multiplied by 1250 is going to give us $18.75. And that's how much he is paid for 1 hour of overtime, $18.75. Next, the question states, calculate his earnings for the 48 hours worked last week. And so in order for us to figure out his earnings for the 48 hours worked last week, the first thing that we have to do is to calculate how many hours of overtime did he work. Well, you do 48 hours because that's how much hours he worked in total, minus 40 hours. And so we do 48 minus 40, which is going to be 8 hours, which means that he worked 8 hours of overtime. So 40 hours, regular work week, but then 8 more hours, which is his 8 hours overtime. Next, we have to figure out his pay for 8 hours of overtime. So it's overtime pay for 8 hours of overtime work, which is going to be 8 multiplied by how much he is paid per hour for overtime, which is going to be $18.75. So 8 times $18.75 gives us $150. And so we're going to use this information to help us to determine his total earnings for last week. So we're going to add his regular earnings plus his overtime pay. What is his regular earnings? Well, his regular earnings is going to be $500. And what is his overtime pay? Well, his overtime pay is $150. And so we have 500 plus 150, which is going to give us 650. And so that means that his total earnings for last week was $650. Next, the question asks the following. It says the employee's national insurance contribution is 3.9% of the total earnings. Calculate Eric's national insurance contribution for last week. And so in order for us to determine his total, in order for us to determine his national insurance contribution for last week, what we have to do is we have to calculate, or we have to determine 3.9% of the total earnings. Now, when we say of, we mean to multiply. So 3.9% of his total earnings. And so that's going to be 3.9%. We're going to write 3.9% as a fraction. So we have 3.9 over 100 multiplied by 650 over 1. Next, we multiply 3.9 multiplied by 650, which is going to be 2,535. And then we have 100 multiplied by 1, which is going to be 100. And so we have 2,535 divided by 100. And when we do that, we get $25.35. And so that means that his national insurance contribution for last week is $25.35. Next, the question asks us to determine his net earnings. And so his net earnings is going to be how much does he have left after he pays his national insurance contribution. And so we have to subtract. Eric's net earnings is going to be $650 minus $25.35. And so when we subtract, we get $624.65. And so that means that his net earnings is going to be $624.65. And that is his net earnings after he pays his national insurance contribution.